The Old Testament lesson for today is from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian.
And the New Testament reading is from Matthew in the 4th chapter, beginning with verse 12. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, Jesus withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home at Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. I invite you for the moment to think in terms of Zebedee. So I will pretend to be Zebedee for the moment. Dorothy suggested I could come in singing Zebedee Doo-Dah, Zebedee-A. But let's put ourselves in Zebedee's shoes for a moment. Can't you hear Zebedee saying, "Well, what do you make of this? Along comes this wandering peasant, probably recruiting for some group of zealots, and my boys just up and follow him. So how am I to keep up our fishing trade? After all, we have mouths to feed. We can trade fish for our other necessities and sell fish for a bit of income, and they just walk out on me." Oh, I know. I could have gone with them. I heard the invitation too. Virtually everyone in our region is anxious to overthrow those Romans who are lording it over us and corrupting our ways of faith and life. But let's be realistic. We have our own responsibilities to fulfill, and our families and communities are depending on us. I guess I'll just have to keep on keeping on, as the saying goes.
Will
Futures are calling. No, I'm not thinking of the commodity market or other investments, although they too call us toward possible futures, as their name implies. But I invite you to think of other ways the future may call you. For instance, put yourselves in the shoes of a man or a woman who's working intently at home to prepare a presentation which is supposed to be given tomorrow. You're deeply engrossed in your work when one of your children comes to the study door and calls, "Mommy, Mommy," or "Daddy, Daddy." How are you going to respond? Will you put your work on hold and respond to your child? Or will you put your child off saying, "I'm busy right now"? In that kind of circumstance, as a parent, you would be having a Zebedee-type experience. Zebedee had a particular future in mind and suddenly faces a choice between two futures, both of which called for response. James and John and Zebedee heard the calls to two different futures: the future they were planning on as fishermen, and the future to which Jesus was calling them. Zebedee chose one of those futures. James and John chose the other. Now, if you stop to think about it, you probably have Zebedee-type experiences pretty often. Every time another person unexpectedly calls for your attention when you are already busy, be it a child, a spouse, a neighbor, a colleague, a client, whoever, you have to choose which future you will live into next. And what about text messages, Facebook, Twitter? Do you just wait and deal with those later, or do you respond to them when they come? Sometimes these calls from others call us into a welcome future, at least for a moment, and then maybe we can get back to what we were doing. But sometimes the call of another person is an unwelcome interruption, and we face the choice of future as a dilemma. I think of pastors, such as Pastor Kuhn, who has plenty of responsibilities to fulfill, may be busy at her desk, and at the same time, new needs and often new demands come to her, and she is expected to respond. Well, people aren't the only source of callings in to different futures. Zebedee's life in the first century was so much simpler than our own in the 21st century. We are literally bombarded by advertisements, for instance. Every ad invites us into the kind of future that it has to offer. In fact, those ads are designed to lure us, to entice us, to tempt us to take up some product or service or experience as an important ingredient of our future. And then there are those campaign promises which call on us to vote for one candidate or another, or to support some piece of legislation. 2014 is an election year, and the future of our communities, our state, our nation is shaped by our votes. So you can expect to be inundated with calls to make this future or that future or some other future real. Well, how are we to respond to a situation in which we face so many possible futures? I suggest several typical ways we might respond. First, some of us may have a strong sense of responsibility, as Zebedee did as we portrayed him. He can be counted on to fulfill responsibilities, even if it means to be less likely to be very responsive to other people or to other opportunities. Such persons make solid spouses and parents and citizens, householders. Life is good, but it may also be pretty unexciting, even boring. Well, secondly, some of us may relish the world of options. We see them all as opportunities and revel in the freedom to choose. It is easier to be free spirits, of course, when we are not burdened by a lot of responsibilities or commitments. Or thirdly, some of us may try to have it both ways. We try to be available to everybody else and to be alert to new opportunities while continuing to fulfill our promises and responsibilities faithfully. Well, it may cost us. We may have to burn the midnight oil or work all weekend in order to get it all done. You know, pastors often live this way, and so do working mothers and fathers, and especially single parents. Unfortunately, it may lead to exhaustion and burnout. Well, there's a fourth option. Some of us may be searching for a more meaningful life. We want to make a difference, and we find something or someone that appears to be worth committing ourselves to. Or perhaps it's that something or someone finds us and calls us forth. This may be what happened to Simon, Andrew, James, and John. But there's still another possibility. Some of us may feel overwhelmed by the sea of possible futures which call to us, and we may muddle along without knowing what for or why. And sometimes we may feel simply paralyzed. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this a kind of despair, the despair of possibility due to the lack of necessity. And some of us may feel trapped in a rut, unable to see any new options or opportunities for us. The only future we can see is more of what we've been enduring. People in abusive situations or victims of human trafficking often feel that way. The only option is to survive another day. Kierkegaard called this, too, a kind of despair, the despair of necessity due to the lack of possibility. So I ask you to consider, do you identify with any of these six styles of living into your future? Are you more often responsible or carefree or committed or at a loss or stuck or trying to do it all? And chances are you haven't always been the way you are now. At other times early in your life, and you'll probably still be different later in your life, because so much depends on the circumstances, and circumstances change. Well, let's consider Zebedee again. Do you think he missed the boat, so to speak, by staying in his own boat? and not following Jesus as his sons did? Well, isn't it possible that given his circumstances and his responsibilities at that time, the best way for him to follow the call of Jesus was to keep on being a literal fisherman, providing for his family and contributing to the welfare of his community? Who are we to judge someone else's calling if it is not clearly contrary to the will and way of God? But the big question for today, this Sunday in Epiphany, is how do you respond to Jesus' call to follow? How are you called? To what are you called? How are you claiming your vocation, the theme of our Epiphany season? Well, Pastor Kuhn has been emphasizing that our gifts and abilities are callings from God. All of us are gifted in various ways, as the Apostle Paul reminds us. What are your gifts, and how are you called to use them? How do your gifts give a sense of direction to your future? The voice of God is calling. Or another source of calling from God is the human needs we encounter. How do you respond to human needs? And how can you do so respectfully in ways that are not demeaning or patronizing? Maybe it is by serving community meals, staffing the winter shelter, tutoring at a school, or building a school in Honduras. The voice of God is calling through human need. And thirdly, amidst the multitude of possibilities and opportunities to which advertisements and campaigns and causes and fundraisers call us every day, there may be some which come to us as calls from God. To which ones will you respond? The voice of God may be calling. But beware, not every voice is a call from God. How can we sort out what is good or right or appropriate from the rest? How can we sort out what is okay or harmless? And how can we identify what may intentionally or unintentionally have negative or destructive consequences? Well, a few classical Christian practices might guide us. First, this test. Is your sense of calling consistent with the ways and teachings of Jesus, or with the great themes of the Bible? Now be sure, not everything we can find in the Bible is consistent with the way of Christ, but the Bible is a rich source of consistent themes about loving God, others, and ourselves, about justice and mercy, well-being, and peace. The Bible can be a guide to our discernment of the call of God to us. Well, there are also guides and models for us in the history of the church. Now, as with the Bible, not everything in the history of the church and the actions of people who are trying to be faithful turns out to be very godly. But still, we can learn much about God's will and way from the faithful who have lived before us. And then there are the folk in our own time and in our own midst who model for us a variety of ways to respond to God's call. Here at Apostles, we have heard the testimony of at least 3 persons whom I therefore feel free to name. Andy Apple, who at this moment is in transit with that group to dedicate the school we built in Honduras. And there's Steve Daniels, whose passionate and generous caring speaks of the Christian life. And I keep thinking of the late Tom Rex, who spoke so freely of the major turnaround in his own life when he embraced the Christian faith. And you know, quite a few of our members found in recent years that their call was to ordained ministry. Young, old, middle-aged, including Nora Smith, Bill Worley, Kathy Ryan, Karen Lovelace. And then there is Pope Francis, who leads by example as well as teaching. So to whom might you look up as models of what following Jesus is like, and choose your futures accordingly? Talking with others may help you to discern your calling and find the courage to follow. The voice of God is calling. Come, let us follow. Amen.